Hey, Allison. Hey, Christine. Hi, Melissa. Hi, S. Hi, Dan. Hi, Cordelia. Thank you all for coming.
Christine, I feel like we haven't seen you in so long. It's good to see your face.
Someday you're gonna have to start calling me Chris.
I will make it today. Oh,
Oh,
great. Let's see. It's 7:04. I'll wait one more minute and then I'll go ahead and start. Out of curiosity, has anyone had the chance to read Rob's book yet? Good to know.
It was a tough read, but I loved it.
Mm. I don't want to spoil anything. That's why I asked. Okay. Well, I will go ahead and maybe, oh, we have another admission. Rob, I'll count on you to watch the admissions while I
yeah. While you're doing the
do my
intro, sure.
spiel. So, welcome everybody to this course hosted by Revise and Shine. And it's really getting fun. The more we do these, the more we recognize the people in the room. And I love that. If you don't know who we are, and I don't think there's anyone in the room that doesn't, but Revise and Shine is a team of caring professionals building a community where passionate writers like you can learn, grow, and thrive together. Revise and Shine provides a monthly newsletter, developmental critiques and coaching, writing retreats, an occasional, very occasional, writer's book club, and instructional Zoomies provided by our staff, Rob Costello, Lisa Klein Ransom, Joan Knowles, and myself, as well as guest presenters such as Nora Shalway Carpenter, who will be speaking on Writing and Reading Rural on Wednesday, May 28th. And I will put links to her event, our website, and the newsletter in the chat. One note, tomorrow is the deadline for registering for the Revise and Shine residency. It will be held October 15th to the 19th at beautiful Potash in Vermont. Each participant will work with two of our team members. One team member will provide detailed feedback on 20 pages of work. The second team member will act as writing mentor in any capacity that would be helpful to you. We also have an agent, Stephen Babara from Inkwell Management, who Lisa reports is one of the kindest agents she's met, and editor Eileen Robinson, editorial director at Charles Bridge Moves. Optional meetings with the agent and the editor will be available. You can learn more about the retreat at our website, but don't delay. May 1st is tomorrow. This presentation will be recorded and the recording made available to you tomorrow. Before we begin, I want to remind you to mute your microphone. Rob will read a little bit. He and I will engage in a conversation, and then we'll open it up for your questions. Now it's my pleasure to begin the evening. Rob needs no introduction to those of you here, but if you do want an introduction, his bio is on the website. Instead, I want to use this time to introduce his stunning novel, An Ugly World for Beautiful Boys. The title alone gives me chills. Self-styled beautiful boy, Toby Ryerson dreams in stardust, but lives in the dirt. Haunted by the specter of his mom's overdose, he itches for a life of fun and fabulosity far from his backwoods Adirondack town. Toby knows his older brother Jimmy didn't sacrifice everything to raise him so he could waste his life on men and partying like mom did. But why can't Jimmy see that he is their mother's son? When Toby outs the boy who broke his heart in a fit of rage, the web of lies he's spun to manage Jimmy's expectations quickly unravels. A brutal beating leads to a campaign of cyberbullying, culminating in even greater disaster. Enter Gabe, a sexy stranger from mom's past who seduces Toby with the keys to the Big Apple. When Toby's dreams of a fabulous life in the city quickly turn into a nightmare, will Jimmy's love be enough to save him, or will he end up just like mom? An Ugly World for Beautiful Boys is a gritty and harrowing queer coming-of-age novel, as well as a love story between two mismatched brothers coping with the burden of secrets and the legacy of shame. So, a very big, amazing novel. I was just telling Rob, I had the opportunity to read this novel in an earlier draft and then reread it with much excitement for this event, and we'll probably turn around and just begin all over again. There is so much in this story. So let's start, Rob, by telling us what was the first thing you knew about this story? What?
Do you want me to read first,
Oh,
or
of course, of
I
course.
don't
That's
have
the
to.
plan. I'm so eager to talk to you. It's the plan. I said it's the plan. Go ahead.
I won't read long. I won't read long. I promise. So just a heads up before I proceed that my main character, Toby, narrates this book, and he's got a potty mouth. He swears like a sailor, so just be prepared for that. And he starts it right off. So chapter 1, fuck this shit. I gaze down upon the diva with the ardent longing of a beautiful boy who dreams in stardust but lives in the dirt. A weekend in the Andes with Ravisha Man. Below the magazine headline, a breathtaking full-page shot of the world's greatest genderqueer superstar wearing a pink satin ball gown and 8-inch stiletto knee-high boots, climbing the steps of Machu Picchu. Ravisha glowed, towering, strong, and regal. Mom, I imagine the ancient Incas falling to their knees at the mere sight of her magnificence. I quivered with envy, or maybe that was just the mini-mart air conditioning blasting through your silky coral camisole tucked into my cutoffs. I knew Ravisha was a look I could never pull off, though I will admit to my pixie-ish charm thanks to your superfly jeans, Mom. God bless our high Scandinavian cheekbones, our eyes the algae blue of Shelter Lake, and our sun-blonde hair that's 100% natural, although the proof of that has been nared away since the first pubes appeared on my little patch of heaven. But despite these gifts, I'm 17 now and still shorter than a fire plug and skinnier than a piss stream. I stand about as likely to pull off regal as a chihuahua at a parade of Great Danes. Undaunted by the diva's clear superiority, I scanned the article, nibbling a fleck of limerick green off my fingernail. The bio, written to be inspirational, was dull. Impoverished queer boy, Deshaun Morris, grew up in a shack deep in the Mississippi Delta, catches the eye of DJ Yuri Cohen at a New Orleans nightclub, and quickly ascends the global EDM ladder. There were also a few tasty nuggets about the Mantasia World Tour I'd already read online, including that the upcoming grand closing show would be at the infamous Terminal City in Hell's Kitchen. My heart ached. Mom, I would have sold my left kidney to go to that show, but it wasn't going to happen. Jimmy would have sooner sworn off beer than entrusted me with a night on my own in Manhattan. He didn't understand that I belonged there, that the city already beat in my blood, the pulse and heat of it, the energy and noise. The city was all the future I'd ever desired. It held beautiful boys that looked like me, thought like me, and wanted the same things out of life I wanted. Concerts and clubs, fabulous clothes and killer looks, long nights rolling on the latest chemical enhancers, followed by loud, raunchy sex with a different beautiful man every night of the week. Mantasia was just a taste, a distant glimpse of sky from the bottom of the deep, black well that was my life in Shelter Valley. Our shithole town was too small to contain me forever, and so was my brother. I'd find a way to climb out and reach the sunlight someday. I refused to fall back into darkness here. I owed you better than that. I just needed to do it without breaking Jimmy's heart. Okay, that's a good place to stop.
So now I can ask you.
No, you can ask.
So what was the seed of this story? What was the first thing you knew about it? What came to you initially?
Oh, that's a crazy story, which I think you know. Um, the seed of this story was actually all the way back in grad school at VCFA when I read The Folk Keeper by Franny Billingsley, and I decided I wanted to write my own Selkie story. And so this book actually started as a fantasy, a Selkie fantasy, about a teenage girl named Fiona who lived in the Adirondacks and who thinks her mother, who died when she was a young girl, she remembers her walking into the sea and committing suicide when she was a young girl. She comes to believe that her mother's a Selkie. And so that was the seed of the story, and it started that way. And Toby was her best friend, like her sidekick. Um, and I wrote that book, and it took me many years. And the more I wrote, the more important Toby became, and the less important Fiona became. Um, and eventually I finished a draft with Toby as the main character and Fiona as the sidekick, and shared it with my very good friend Ann Mazer. And she read it and she basically said this book would work if you got rid of Fiona and all the Selkie crap and focused on Toby, because that's the real story you want to tell. And she was absolutely right. And I just needed her permission to do that. I needed somebody to tell me that because I'd spent so many years trying to make Fiona work. And once I got that permission, I rewrote it and very quickly, and it became the book that now exists.
And so it sounds like it was a pretty exhilarating experience to let go of one and move into.
That was, oh my God, that was, it was like a switch flipped in my brain. We went out for coffee. It was like a week before Christmas, I think. And she was very nervous. And I could tell she didn't want to tell me. It was like, she was going to tell me my baby was ugly or something. But she did. God bless her. She just like came right out. She didn't hold back. And like the first hour, it felt like a gut punch. But very quickly after that, everything started to click, and it was like this rush. And I was like, "Oh my God, this is it! I know how to fix this book. I know how to make it work." And that was in December, and by I'd say April, I had a complete draft, and I started querying shortly after that, and I got my agent Marie in June. So it all came together really quickly after that.
I love knowing that. The anyone who's read your work, and that's all of us here, I know that, um, knows that you have such a command of setting. Like that is your thing. You can create uh, anything from a sweeping setting to quotidian details. I mean, you just are amazing. But what they may not know is that you are also, well, they will when they read this book or any of your other work, like your ability to create characters is just stuns me. So Rob and I have worked on a number of projects together, and that's put us in a room brainstorming. And you're able to like describe a character immediately as if they've just walked in the room and you've known them for 10 years. And I don't get that. I sit there in front of my computer and I am waiting for my characters to say something that reveals themselves.
Mm.
So how long have you been able to do this? Like, do you recognize this ability in yourself to sort of, it sounds like with this book, you wrote it very fast. Um, your ability to sort of bring full characters onto the scene in a very quick.
Hmm. I don't know that it always works that way, but I think for me, I don't get very far with a project until I know the characters. And so usually by the time I'm actually seriously thinking about telling this story, I I kind of know who they are. And I don't know why that is. I don't know. That's a really interesting question. It's something I never really thought about because I do kind of think that I struggle with characters sometimes. Um, I didn't with this book, interestingly enough. Like Jimmy and Toby's brother Jimmy and Toby, obviously, and Rosella, who is a completely new character in the revision. Rosella did not exist before I had that conversation with Anne, and she came together like I immediately knew her, and I don't know how that happened either. That's sort of Toby's best friend, an elderly woman that runs the trailer park where he and his brother live. And he spends a lot of time with her. And she sort of came from bits of people I knew. But as a character, as a whole character, she just came to me almost immediately. And yeah, I don't know where that comes from. I don't know. That's a really lame answer, but it
No,
just, they pop into my head sometimes that way.
see, I was just hoping you were going to give me the trick.
I don't know that there is a trick.
I know.
Yeah,
I'm just
I don't
kidding.
know.
You're just so good at it. You're so good. Was all of these characters are beautiful and flawed in such meaningful ways. And did you have compassion for all of them as you were writing? Or were there some characters that you had less compassion for?
Um, I think all the major characters, even Gabe, who's kind of I don't want, I hesitate to call him the villain, but he's the antagonist in a way. Um, I have compassion for him, even though he's deeply problematic character. I think, I think the thing about characters, even secondary characters, is if you write them to be two-dimensional or three-dimensional, excuse me, you have to have a certain level of compassion because you have to understand where they're coming from and why they make the choices they make and why they make the mistakes they make. And once you understand that, it's hard not to have compassion for them. So even like the Schley brothers, who are both really big jerks, like I sort of thought it was important to give them a reason for being really big jerks. And, so Toby was kind of a jerk to them, a jerk to Eddie Schley, who he anointed with the nickname Scarface when the kid was like they were like in fifth grade or something, because the boy's father had beat him up and put him through a plate glass window, and so he has a scar in his face. But it was Toby who started calling him Scarface. So now that they're teenagers and this kid's become a bully, partly because he's been tormented his whole life by this nickname. So everybody has a reason for why they're the way they are. And I guess there's some compassion in that. I think the only character in the book that I have no compassion for is Lon, who's sort of a very small secondary character that appears late in the book. And he's just a slime bag. I have no compassion for him at all. Or Loafer Man. I don't have any compassion for Loafer Man either, but
No.
yeah, those characters I don't have any compassion for.
So this book is written as a direct address. Toby is writing to his mom. And at what point did you make the decision to write it in that way?
Uh, Pretty early. Once I knew that I was sort of made the mental shift from it was still, going to be a fantasy with Fiona and her mother. And then I realized, well, okay, I'm going to have this mirror story with Toby and his mother. And so they both have, these, absent mothers and how that sort of formed their life and why they became friends. And so Fiona's sections, when I was writing that, were sort of written in journal entries to her mother. And so it's a certain point I decided that Toby was going to be the main narrator, and then Fiona's sections were going to be secondary. And I don't know, it felt right for him to be talking to his mother as he was telling this story. And so it became more and more important as the book went on and as I continued to write. And eventually I figured out, I mean, by the end of the book, you understand why it's direct addressed to his deceased mother. But I didn't know why for a long time. I just knew it felt right.
And were there particular challenges or advantages that you discovered writing it in this way?
I think the biggest, yeah, I mean, I think part of I always struggle with sort of first person, like the logic of it, like this a character like constantly narrating everything they do. And so I think part of why I did it this way was just sort of to get over that, like to have a reason for Toby to be narrating this everything that happens. And so that actually made it easier for me to write. But by the same token, it was really sort of hard to like have to keep reminding the reader that he's telling this story to his mother. And like, am I doing it too often? Will it become annoying? You know, where can I pare that back? How often do I need to remind the reader of that before, you know, without it becoming intrusive? And so getting that balance right was tricky.
Well, I thought you were, it was very effective.
Oh, good.
I
Thank
think,
you.
I feel like you got the balance. So this book it's such an exploration of masculinity and vulnerability. And Samantha Hui, one of your first reviews, the independent reviewer,
Mhm.
wrote this. This novel shines in its exploration of the various ways masculinity manifests in the lives of young men, highlighting the damaging effects of toxic masculinity in every scenario. And because we're friends and because I got to see your immediate response when you got that review, you were surprised. You were surprised to find out that your book was a book about toxic masculinity, or this is what I want to explore with you right now. Do you agree? And
I mean, I absolutely agree. And I guess what surprised me was that it was obvious and that it came across. And it's just something that I like that's embedded in everything I write. Like it's just always sort of the subtext. And it wasn't something I was deliberately trying to analyze. Like it just sort of was there. It was like in the air of this place and these characters, and it's in the air of everything I write. So I found it very gratifying that she picked up on that and like, you know, sort of highlighted it, because yeah, that's it. I mean, that's the ball game, right? Like that's what homophobia is about and misogyny is about, and everything bad that happens in this book the seeds are in toxic masculinity and patriarchy, and you know the way it shapes
Mhm.
our society and people's behavior, and you know all of that. So I was really gratified that reviewer like really picked up on that.
No, that's great. So there is a question that I want to ask, but I'm going to stumble because it's something I want to explore with you, but I don't quite know how to ask it. Your book is about both promiscuity and slut shaming.
Mhm.
And so, um, women are slut shamed, queer men are slut shamed, um, and yet straight men get to be explorers, right?
Mhm.
And so, was it hard to write with that, exploring Toby's sexuality with that in mind? His mom is right away we get that he loves his mom. He loves her free spirit. He loves, he's got all of these objects, yet she's known in town as sleazy, right? It's one of the words that they use kiddingly.
Mhm.
And um and Toby is exploring his sexuality, and he does it, of course, without a whole lot of awareness. He's not yet recognizing the trauma that he's experienced in a very healing way yet.
Mhm.
But did you find that hard when you were writing to know how far to push it in each direction?
Yeah, I would say that was the hardest thing of all. I mean, it's really the core difficulty that I had with telling Toby's story was sort of that that conflict between I mean I am afraid of sort of slut shaming Toby, slut shaming his mother, sort of portraying this sex in this really horrible light. But at the same time, that is what people that experience that kind of shame and internalize it, and that's how homophobia sort of manifests often, is by that kind of behavior, and it can be really destructive, and it can be really self-destructive. And so that's what I wanted to wrestle with. And it's one of those things that I will never know if I completely got it right. And I guess it really depends on who's reading the book, whether they feel like the balance is right, whether I've gone too far in one direction or another. But what you describe is something that Toby literally wrestles with in the book. Like he at one point he actually talks about the double standard. Like, straight guys can do whatever they want, and they can sleep with whomever. And because his mother's had this reputation for sleeping with younger men, and he's sort of reflecting on the fact, well, if those younger men would, with their friends, would brag about it, meanwhile she is treated like this basically a whore because she did this horrible thing. And so there's this double standard there, and it's a double standard he falls into, and then discovers pretty quickly that it's why that's problematic, right? Like bad things happen. Yeah, it's a really you can tell I'm even having trouble sort of articulating my thoughts on it, because it was such a difficult thing to write about, and very 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 nuanced, and potentially upsetting to people depending on where they're coming from.
I thought you handled it brilliantly. And part of that is going all the way back to one of my first questions about characterization, because it's the characters in this book are so real and so multifaceted, and we can see where all of their behavior is coming from, and the things that they grapple with. And it ties in, of course, to consent. And I think that's the other thing that you handled really well is, when is something consensual? When is it not consensual?
Mhm.
And how does consent change the whole argument, right?
Mhm.
It's a big part
And
of it.
what does consent even mean when, say, the character's 17, a person 17 and drunk and intoxicated, and like thinks they're giving consent,
Yes, right.
like actively thinks that they have consented, but
No.
they're in no position to be even thinking that, right? So yeah, I mean it's very it feels like dangerous territory, but
And you made sure to circle back to that, and I don't want to use the word tell. We hear from Toby that he's heard from his therapist that that's not consent.
mhm,
Nevertheless, as readers, we get it. We get
mhm.
it in that moment, the difference. So you did such a good job of
Oh, good.
portraying, yeah, um, that concept. I'm looking at my notes now. Um, one of the things that I wanted to say is you write unflinchingly. Like, you do not back off. And there are hard emotions in this book. And how do you do it? How do you dig down during those difficult scenes?
I mean, I guess I try not to think about it. I just sort of try to think, well, what are the consequences of this decision? Why are these characters behaving this way? What is the reason we're at this point in the story? And then if it makes sense that it's something difficult, then that's just the way it is, right? Like I don't know. I try not to censor that. I feel like when I read books that are heading in a particular direction, and then you can tell the writer has been scared to go there or has backed off. I always am aware of that, and I always feel like, well, obviously they would have done or said or done this in the real, if these were real characters, but you didn't want to do that. And I don't ever want to make that mistake, or I don't ever want to feel like I'm pulling back and not being honest or true to the actual story these characters are telling. And so, yeah, I just sort of, whatever, I'll write it and then see what, I'll worry about the consequences later.
Do you experience the emotions that they do as you're writing it?
Um, Not usually. I don't get super close like that. Um, there are a few moments in this book. There's a scene late in the book in sort of the pivotal scene in the book that takes place in a restroom in a nightclub in New York City. That scene was really difficult to write. And it's also, I think, the best thing I've ever written, or at least I feel it is, because I worked on that so hard, and I just, that was brutal. That was really hard to write. And then there's a moment after that, in front of an apartment, a closed apartment door, which for those people who have read the book will know that moment. That moment always gets me. And then there's a scene, there's a scene between Toby and his brother in a pickup truck. They're driving late in the book. And that scene also was like where they're spitting hard truths at each other. And that was another where I felt those emotions. But yeah, generally speaking, I don't. Generally speaking, I'm able to sort of keep some distance.
So the road to publication with this book, I mean, you wrote it very quickly.
Yeah.
Once you decided on the story, you got your agent very quickly. Marie went out with it, and then it was a hard road.
Yeah.
And after you sold the book, then you had to do one more revision.
Mm-hmm.
Did you find that during that revision, did the fact that it didn't get scooped right up, and I want you to, I'm opening the door for you to talk about why you think it didn't get scooped up right away. And I'm wondering if the reasons that are likely that it didn't get scooped up had any effect on how you revised. Like, did you want to pull back a little? Did you weigh decisions differently?
So that's a really good question. It's really interesting. In fact, I just published an essay about this in School Library Journal, Teen Librarian Toolbox yesterday, about why I think that I had such a hard time selling this book, which is, the content. It's very edgy. There's a lot of, there's a lot of sex. There's a lot of profanity, drug use. There's an age-inappropriate relationship. There's just a lot of heavy themes, and the kidlit market and YA market is very much, when it comes to queerness, focused on positive, empowering queer joy narratives, and has been for some time, which I think is great. It's important, and we went way too long without those stories being told. But I think part of the unintended consequence of that is that those stories sell, like Heartstopper and Red, White, and Royal Blue. Those books have sold really well, and they've sort of trained the market that that's what queer YA fiction is supposed to be about. And so editors and publishers, they're just not really interested in anything but that, because it's safe and they can sell it. And up until a year or two ago, they didn't have to worry about, parents and librarians and teachers and whatever, like, being upset about those kinds of books. Like, those were safe books to publish. Nowadays, anything queer is at risk of being banned. So that's sort of been thrown out the window. But for most of the time that this book was being queried, it was the case that, those kinds of books were really popular. And so nobody was interested in this because it was, it was dark, it was edgy, it was not what was selling. And I understand that, but I also understand that there are lots and lots of queer kids who are like experiencing some version of Toby's story and have no books to reflect that. Like, there's just none. There are very few that deal with any of sort of the dark side of entering the queer community as a young person. And so I really wanted to write that, and so that's what I did. And so we had a really hard time. I mean, we went through almost 50 editors, and pretty much literally every imprint in children's imprint there is. And finally, my first book, a short story collection, a sort of quasi crossover YA adult short story collection, had been published by Leafy Press, a small queer press that primarily specializes in queer speculative fiction. And so I hadn't even considered them for this book because this is realistic YA. And at a certain point, Marie said, we could try Steve, my editor there. And I thought, well, I don't know, would he be interested? And she said, well, at this point, it can't hurt, right? Where else are we going to go? And so we talked about it. We're like, well, yeah, if you think Steve might want this book, then great, let's do that. And sure enough, he did. It was sort of a miracle. I was like, wow, finally, this book is going to see the light of day. And then when Steve and I went to do the edits, I mean, most of his edits were line edits. He did an amazing job. I think, this book he cleaned it up. It was the story was pretty well in good shape, but at the line level, it definitely needed a really strong line edit. But one thing that he did point to, there's a sex scene in this book between Toby and this older man that that I never was comfortable with, going back to what we were discussing earlier and your question. And I never quite knew why. And he said, it's just too idealized. Toby, it's just too easy. It goes too smoothly. It wouldn't be like this. And, and the more that I sat with what he said, he was like, you're setting people up to think Gabe is actually a great guy. and you need to plant the seeds that, he's not, even if Toby doesn't necessarily see them at that point. And so that was the big thing that I revised at that point, was that scene. And that took a while. And I think it's much, much better now. And I think it works. It's sort of, I feel much more comfortable with it now than I did before. And I never knew why it made me uncomfortable until we had that conversation. So I'm really glad that he brought that up, because it was really very smart advice.
Oh, that's great. Nothing like a good editor.
Yeah, seriously.
So I have just 2 more questions, and then we'll open it up for everyone. So did you learn anything about yourself writing this book?
I learned to be humble, if that makes sense. When I started, when I was at GCFA and before, I had visions of being, the next hot, right? I mean, we all have these daydreams about how brilliant we are and how wonderful our book is going to be, and and how I would be able to do this thing, writing a novel, and that was 2011 when I started this book, and it didn't go out on submission until 2019. And then at that point, I thought, well, this is a great book. Like, I had my reservations. I had concerns about what I discussed about the reaction of editors. And I kind of knew going in that there were going to be some editors that reacted that way, but I didn't think they all would react that way. So then it was sort of like years, literally 4 years of disappointment. And, we would go out on a round, and it would take of submissions, or and it would take like 6 or 8 months to go through, get responses from all those editors, and then we would regroup, and you know how it is, how long it takes. And so at each one of those stages, my hubris diminished exponentially until, at a certain point I was like, well, whatever. I'm just happy it's published now. And so I think I'm a more humble writer than I was before. And I have a more realistic sense of what how people are going to react to my work.
Wow, I am so glad this book is in the world. So my last question is, if you could go back and talk to your teenage self about this book, what would you say to your teenage self?
That's really tricky because I don't think my teenage self would have needed this book, because I was so not like Toby and so not like anything that happens in this book. Like my teenage self and the world of this book are just so totally divorced. But I think like sort of the messaging around shame and sort of how people internalize shame, and specifically how queer kids internalize shame and how it manifests. I think that would have been something that my teenage self could have, that's a lesson that I could have used to not do that, to like be more mindful about that shame and how I let it, inform my decisions and my self image. And so that, I think, yeah. I
Would
don't know
your
if that answers your question or
That's
not,
an
but
excellent answer. Would your teenage self have liked this book?
oh yeah, yeah. My teenage self, well, because there's lots of, edgy sex and swearing and drugs, and so like I love books that were inappropriate when I was a teenager.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
So I open the floor now to all of you to ask any follow-up or anything you're curious about or any question at all. Chris, remember to unmute.
Well, first of all, Rob, I have to tell you that there is still fantasy in this book. Because I have in fact climbed Machu Picchu, and there's no way in God's green earth that you're going to do it in spike heels. I just want you to know that that beginning is total fantasy.
Well, it's a photo shoot. I assumed she got dressed when she was up there.
I mean, I can't, I didn't laugh a whole lot in this book, but that absolutely had me on the ground. I was dying. I wanted to just compliment you. Jennifer was asking about characters, but I want to compliment you on presenting a character that you can peel layer after layer after layer after layer, and just find so much to cry about. I know this kid. I had this kid in my counseling office, and I loved him and grieved for him being in a place that was so hostile to who he was as a human being. And you have done that so beautifully. So you have the external lack of acceptance, but you have the internal lack of acceptance. And the place that I might have cried the hardest was when I think it's the conversation with Toby and Joe in the truck coming back from New York City, where they decide that forgiveness is a river, endless without a destination. I mean, that touched me very hard, very profoundly, very deeply as a truth. And the other one was, you can't throw away the people you love, no matter how much they hurt you, because they'll always be a part of you. And I thought that was just so profound and so important for teenagers to hear, gay, straight, purple, green. I mean, just, just everybody in the universe. And I want to compliment you on the brilliance of that. Some of your prose is so succinct and gorgeous. And I'm looking at what I wrote, my response after reading the arc. Your line about, oh, where is it? It's her blonde hair. Her blonde curls that resemble yellow baling wire. I thought, I mean, that just put an image in my head that will stay there forever. So just congratulations. I know it took a long road, but oh, there's so much brilliance in this book. I'm really glad it's out there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Thank you for reading it.
Thank you for letting me read it for free. And then, I just sent it to my daughter who had a concussion and was not allowed to read things on the computer for a while, but she's finally able to. So we'll see what she thinks.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Anyone else? Oh, S, I saw a hand.
Yeah, sorry, I thought maybe my video was off. Hi. Hey, Rob.
Hi.
Rob,
Hey.
I love this book. I love this book so much. I had so much identification in this book. I can't even tell you. But I'm thinking, like, listening to you talk about the process of getting it published, and there seems to me like a mirroring with how, like, how Toby thinks that his brother wants him to be, and this like Disney gay fantasy, and how that sort of mirrors like what the publishing world was looking for in the way you were describing, and how this book, like Toby, that's not what it fits, and like how we need, the spectrum of these things. So I'm just curious if you, like, as you were writing it, were you thinking about like that bigger theme as well, like how the sort of nesting dolls of like the story that's happening between these two brothers, and how that's sort of also mirrored with the book itself and the way it's like working with the publishing industry? Was that something that was like the thematic impact? Was that something you were thinking about, or is that just something that happened as it went?
I was always aware when I was writing it that the sex and the age inappropriate relationship were going to make it a really tough sell. So that was always in the background of my head, and I was always worried about that. But to be honest, it was not deliberate. Like I never thought that I would have the trouble that I ended up having. And so to a large extent that ended up being a coincidence. I really didn't expect, well, Dan's here, Dan Clay, and his book, Becoming a Queen, is absolutely gorgeous book and deals with a lot of heavy, difficult subject matter, but not sex in the same way that this book does. And Dan sold that book really quickly. So I think it's the sex thing that just really gets under people's skin, especially the age inappropriate relationship. And I figured, well, there are so many books about teenage girls dealing with this, right? Like, why can't there be a book about a teenage boy dealing with the same issue? Well, there's the politics of that, and there's the whole groomer slander, and there's like people are very afraid of stepping into that, which I understand. But I did not expect that would make this book all but unpublishable. So that answers your question. Oh. Cordelia, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, did your agent, or did you ever consider trying to publish it as an adult book with a teen protagonist?
The voice is really YA, and we did talk about that. And
I
she
understand
said
that wasn't your mission, but I was just curious.
Yeah, no, we definitely did talk about that. And there were times when I thought about doing that, and like I still think, like Nancy and I had this discussion. I still think it's sort of more of a crossover than it is a straight YA. But ultimately, Marie, my agent, and I both felt the voice was very strongly a YA voice, and that it would need to be rewritten if we were going to actually pitch it to an adult audience. It's one of those awkward books that sort of sits between categories. So yeah, I mean, I would have been open to that maybe if I could have figured out a way to do it without losing, what I loved about the book. But we never actually got that far. I mean, maybe if like everybody said no and Steve said no, and it was like just going to sit on my hard drive, maybe I would have gone back at some point and tried to revise it into an adult novel and try it again. But fortunately, we didn't have to do
Yeah,
that.
I think you didn't. Yeah.
Allison, was your hand up?
Yeah. Hi.
Hi,
Congratulations.
thank you. Thank you for coming.
Um, of course. I love um Jen, I love that you asked really positive questions and you talked about all of the glorious things that are in the book. And I'm probably not going to say this, it's a question, but like one of the things, Rob, like when you said the book taught you about humble, I think of you as being like one of the most humble writers, like just don't know how talented you are on a regular basis. And, I was really surprised to hear that part. And then when Jen asked about your teenage self, but I kept thinking, like, what are you joyful? What are you excited about talking to your teen readers about? Because, like, we're all on the call with you tonight. We're so
Mhm.
excited for you. We're so excited for this book. But your readers are going to be those teen readers, and they're going to love spending time with you. So, what are the things that you're excited to talk to them and like activities to do with them? I'm such a nerd when it comes to activity type things
I
too,
haven't thought about
but
activities.
I mean, like what kind of writing things do you think will come from it? And like what scenes do you hope to talk about with them? So it's kind of my question. Like your readers. We're your
Yeah,
readers. We're with you, but like your readers.
I think if I were going to have, I mean, I'm kind of terrified about talking about this book with teens just because of the subject matter and like where that conversation might go. Um, but the parts of it that I'm excited about talking to teens about are like, I want to talk about Ravisha Mann, who's this diva that I created, who's sort of part RuPaul and part Amanda Lepore for anybody who knows the Club Kids and that scene. Dan knows, but yeah. So I I and the music and the club scene and like all of that. I'm like really I would love to talk to kids about that because I love that kind of music. And that's sort of where my sort of teenage self found its way into this story was through the music and sort of being sort of obsessed with like a celebrity and a musical celebrity and having like the constellation of all these pictures that he's cut out of magazines on his ceiling. That's something I basically did when I was a kid. So yeah, I think that is one thing that I would really love to talk about. I'd also really love to talk about the experience of being a rural queer kid and how hard that is. I should say how hard it can be. I don't think it always is. Um, so that's something I think I would like to talk to teens about too. In terms of activities, I don't think about activities. I probably
Well, we'll
should.
talk about activities when
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
together. We'll
yeah.
talk,
You can help me. We can come up with a game
talk
plan
about
because
that.
I haven't
That's
thought about that.
I
so
think that's the
excited for
question of
you.
a middle grade author.
Yeah,
I like to write with teens too.
I
I'm
think
so excited for you. Congratulations.
thank
what
you,
you
thank
shared at
you.
the beginning could be, you could make an activity from that. Like you had a whole story that you had written for years and then it didn't really work
Yeah,
until you went to the secondary character, you got that feedback. I think that's like the value of, I think you could make an activity for teens from that.
yeah, maybe. Yeah, that's a good idea. I'll think about that. Thank you.
Particularly because teens think that you just sit down and you write.
Yeah, yeah, and there's no
And they
revision
have,
involved. Yeah,
and
yeah.
there's, yeah, I mean, I think that would be really a really good thing to present to people who want to write. The other thing that I love about this book, which is probably the reason you couldn't sell it, I get into trouble so often just speaking truth to people, to kids, because adults don't speak truth to children. Adults speak Disney to children. Adults speak rainbows and unicorns and happy endings, and then we have children who are completely unprepared for what life is going to toss at them. And the value in this book is that it's real. It's gritty. I'm sorry. There's a lot of garbage in people's lives. And I think that it just says to kids, there are people out there who love you, who are going to be there. Like, you may not always get along, but there are people out there who love you, and we don't throw each other away. We might not speak for years, but we love you and we will be here. And I think that's a really important message for kids. I think they don't get a whole lot of that. I mean, I know they don't. My infamous example is a 5-year-old whose mother went to prison for 10 years. And the father refused to tell the kid that mother was in prison. And I'm saying to the dad, so it's better for her to think that mom just kind of walked out the door and didn't come back on her? I mean, like, can you process what you're telling this child? And I think that this book says to kids, life sucks sometimes, and look for the people who love you, who will be there with you. And that's just a beautiful message.
Thank you. Thank you. That's exactly the message that I hoped it would convey. So thank you. Nancy, did you have your hand up?
I did, but I kind of forget. Oh, you know this. I didn't feel much revision was needed to make it an adult novel. I think that we have an artificial idea of the difference between a young adult novel and an adult novel, but it's really, there's many a novel published as adult that could have been published as YA and vice versa. But water under the bridge. And I also just wanted to comment that for me also, as Chris was just saying, that relationship between Toby and his brother was the heart of the novel. And that moment toward the end when he comes home from the club and sees
Don't give it away. Don't.
Sorry.
Spoiler.
That was for me, that's the burst into tears of just joy and relief moment. So good.
Yeah, that's my favorite part of the book.
So powerful, so beautiful.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
And thank you for being a reader, giving me all kinds of feedback when I needed it.
Very great pleasure.
Any other questions for Rob? Thank you all for
Yes,
being
thank you.
here tonight, for being part of this conversation, for this celebration. Rob, we love the book.
Thank you all very
Those
much.
that
I
haven't-
really appreciate it.
Those of you who haven't read it yet, I am so jealous.
Yes, so thank you very much. And if those of you who have read it, please review it on Goodreads and Amazon. If you're so inclined, I would really appreciate that. I need all the reviews I can get. Thank you.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thanks again for coming.
Congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations. Good night.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Thank you, Jennifer. That was wonderful.
Oh, you did a fabulous job. Isn't this bizarre that there's another Jennifer Jacobson here?
Yeah, how did that happen?